What is the source of these troubles we are in, and why has Islam taken center stage while Christianity and other religions seem moribund? These questions seem to have taken on greater importance with the latest action taking place in Israel. To understand the dynamics of this and other ages, we need to push aside the incidentals and superfluous, the stuff meant to distract from what is really going on. The enemy always attempts to exhaust their opponent's resources in fighting a diversion, while the main attack is carried out elsewhere. The main conflict appears to be a political one. Everything seems to have a left and right version. But this war between the political poles is not winnable. It is not the real war, it is a war of shadows, not of real things, and it will settle nothing. The conflict has been formalized into a political contest between parties. The right may lose an election of the left, but winning or losing an election today has no impact on the next cycle or what happened in the past. A win today can easily be erased by a loss tomorrow or 4 years later. So the two sides can keep fighting even though the win and the loss are equally meaningless. Elections keep a lot of people preoccupied, but the real war over the real issues is being prosecuted elsewhere. Not that the political and economic conflicts do not borrow from the larger war, but political and economic issues cannot be solved so long as the war continues to be waged. The political and economic and indeed, religious conflicts are not fought to solve problems, they are fought to divert attention from where the main attack is happening, much as the Allies were able to divert the Germans' attention away from Dunkirk to Calais. Christians have tried to be Christian as a specialized activity. The tendency seems to be to understand Christianity as akin to a part-time occupation. But the church as an institution in a secular liberal society is not the church that would exist were liberalism overcome. This may seem a moot point to many. The reader might think we mean being in a sovereign nation is similar to being in a nation occupied by an alien military, but what does it matter if the nation is occupied? We are either free of threat and risk or we are not. We can debate the relative merits of conservatism and liberalism, but if we lack a method for calibrating the results and validating our claims, the discussion will not go anywhere. But that is the whole point of politics. It is designed to keep the issue subjective and the points being debated devoid of any objective means of comparison. We either live in faith or fear. If we live in fear, we live exposed to threats from others of our kind. This invariably means we have liabilities. These are situations where split or conflicting ownership claims are applied to the same property. A mortgaged house has an attached liability. A car taken on credit is not owned solely by the registered owner. The lien holder has a claim on an property that is not fully paid for. But how do we pay for a property that was never owned by the person who we purchased it from? The title to property will always be questionable when one purchases stolen goods. If X can make a claim on what you have or access some or all of the value of what you have, or participate in the disposition of what you have, you may be a registered owner and you may hold a title to the property, but you will never be a true owner. An asset exposed to a liability or lien is never owned. This is so common a situation people do not think about it. When a property is not under the total control of a single, solitary sentient, it is not owned. We can only own what we create, and if we did not create it we cannot truly own it. In the medieval period it was common for a lord to own the land and, to a degree, the people on it. He owned the village they lived in and made the laws that governed them. But what is more important is that he had free rein in extracting what wealth he wished from his peasant farmers. The lord was the owner of his lands. This ownership was absolute when compared to the peasants living on his land. Yet, the lower lord was a subject, also. The lord owed allegiance to a higher lord. Every landowner was a lord of his property but a subject of the lord above him. This was true from the present all the way up to the king. But it was possible for a king to be a sovereign and yet be a subject of an emperor. The homeowner has title to his home, but the bank owns a share, and the state has a lien on everything the subject has. The state can and does demand its portion of the value of the homeowner's property. The title to the property is only conditional. The subject or estate does not own assets. We are given a legal license to use property under specific agreements and usage restrictions. Now most people see this as an infringement on their rights as owners. They do not see this as a partnership between state and subject to defraud God of what is his. But who even takes the war between the gods seriously? However, we need to draw a line somewhere between right and wrong and between justice and injustice, and better to make our line as close to where God has placed us than further. It is not uncommon for people to deny the existence of God, and even more common for people to deny or ignore the idea there may be a war between the gods. But if there is no battle between the gods, is there right and wrong? If we deny God, it does not seem to matter. But it would not matter in a physical reality. Of so we think, but values in physical reality is absurd. To talk of right and wrong in a physical universe makes no sense. Life itself becomes absurd when God is denied. This world claims there are thousands of gods and thousands of religions, and therefore it seems that the likelihood of finding the right God is unlikely. We ought not be overwhelmed by the fact or the argument. The truth cannot be destroyed, it can only be hidden under a multitude of lies. There may be 10,000 manifestations of the lie, but it is still one lie and one truth. If there is a truth, everything else is a lie. If God is truth, then the anti-God is false. The question is not so much about which God is God, but where the line is between good and evil. If we cannot know what evil is, how can we know what the truth is? But the first step is believing there is a truth, and that if a thing is not true, then it is necessarily a lie. We need to understand where there is a division and diversity, we do not see strength. Diversity is a multiplication of falsehood. Diversity has only one purpose, and that is to hide the truth. We need to understand where the line is and how to find it when meeting new people. We need to understand how to discriminate right from wrong. If there is no line, no one can be on either side of it, and everything is permitted. If something is not permitted, there is a line. If you tell me this claim or argument is wrong, then you have admitted there is a right and a wrong, and you know how to discern one from the other. The only thing we disagree about is where to draw the line. No one thinks everything is permitted. No one refuses to condemn anything. If they wish to be liberal, they may condemn any restraints being put on people's freedom, but this only means they think freedom is an absolute right, and anything that lessens or constrains that is wrong. We agree with the framework but dispute the conclusions about where the line is to be drawn. There is only one conclusion that can be drawn if you believe in God, and that is that the battle is between theocracies. The only way it cannot be is if there is not only no God but no conception of God, because anyone who believes there is a God must be resolved to implement their worldview. If one creates a worldview different from that set out by their deity, they do not have much of a deity. One can argue there is no God, and atheists have a worldview just as valid as that held by theocrats, but even this argument changes little. All it means is that the atheist worldview is opposed to the theocratic worldview. But then, does this mean there are as many worldviews as there are gods? In one sense this is the case, but if it was actually the case, there are no gods and no truth and no right answer as to how we are to live. Let's summarize the situation one more time to make it clear. If there is no God, there is no truth and no right way to live. If there are many gods, this is the same as there being no God, because a multitude of gods is the same as many human beings. Truth is from one source and one source only, because there is only one truth. This truth has to be from God, or it is not truth, because it does not rise to the level of what truth is. We can have facts without God. The world is a sphere and the electron has a negative charge. We can call these facts, and some say these facts are true, but without God they do not tell us how to live. We can learn every fact there is to know about the world, but it will not tell us if unemployment is wrong, and if wrong, how much unemployment is wrong and what would make it right. We cannot have value judgments without God, because without God we do not have morality. We can have ethics, which are rules created from opinion and issued as regulations by a body with the physical ability to administrate these rules. But these rules can be anything and make legal anything the lawmaker wishes to make legal. Without God we are restricted to ethical systems. Which means that if there are many gods, it is tantamount to saying there is no God, because God is necessarily singular and absolute. If there is a debate or dissension among the gods, none is God. It is more correct to say they are superior beings, or superhuman beings, but they are not God. If mankind is under the law, we are governed by regulations which operate on whim and power. This negates the premise that there is a truth that resides with God. This means that the only place for a line to be drawn is between God and everything else, but in drawing this we see a subdivision or a clearer line between truth and ethics, or between what is God's and what is alien to God. As true as this is, it provides no clear solution, because we are left in the situation we are in already. Cultists will still claim God is their God, and they are on the side of God, and the rest of us are alienated from Him. The war of the gods cannot be settled by arguments as to which God is God. But we have to a degree answered this problem already. Without God, mankind is left with the use of ethics, or rules, as a mode of governance. So the fake gods will resort to rules, because in the end these are gods of human invention. God rules by moral principles or truth, and only God is able to do this. Is "thou shalt not kill" a moral principle or an ethical rule? It depends on your view of God. Is the rule to be implemented as a literal command, or as the statement of an idea or broader worldview? But there is something deeper we need to discuss here, and that is if the "shalt not kill" is a standalone rule or a principle to be implemented within a larger framework. Only God has the authority to turn what is otherwise a rule into a principle. Rules are other regulated. Moral principles are internalized. Rules tend to look back at what is done to determine its validity or justification. Morality is ontological and guides us in terms of how we allocate our resources. "Thou shalt not kill" as a rule only requires us from doing what the law defines as illegal. But as a moral statement it becomes something we work to avoid even in the abstract. We do not do that which might lead to the other person's death. The war of the gods is a war between those who live by rules and those who live by ideals. But there is still a deeper understanding available to us to make the division between the combatants even clearer. There is no objectivity in ethics, there are only rules and the power to enforce or resist. But saying that, if we do not have rules, are we not naturally anarchists? Without rules and ruler makers and enforcers, do we not all resort doing what is right in our own eyes? The answer is a conditional yes. If we are not Christian and we are not subjects under an ethical regulatory system, we resort to anarchy. But Christians are required to live in faith. But other people represent risk to us, which is why Babylon creates rules and regulations for its subjects to follow. But what does it mean to live in faith? Are Christians the same as atheists other than the fact we do not deny God? It has been said that Christians are governed ontologically by moral purpose. We do not see rules as injunctions but as inspiration. But this is all subject to the anecdotal fallacy in that who we are is left subject to personal reminiscence. We can and do argue forever about who God is and our standing with Him. So, in fact, this division into those who believe in God and are governed by moral purpose and those who embrace ethical solutions, is not as definitive as it might seem at first. If our analysis is correct, we are left with a scenario dominated by an almighty God and those who devise ways to live outside of His influence. The latter group are what the Bible refers to as Babylonians, but which in modern times are called liberal. Babylonians are defined by their reliance on laws, but this is not the crucial factor that we must uncover, for there is a reason why the unconverted use laws rather than moral principles as a foundation for their cultures. The many gods man subscribes to are a cover for man's usurpation of God. In a word, unbelievers are parasites or freeloaders, and they want a free ride. People who deny God want to reap where they did not sow. For many, the world is a confusing mess. The unbeliever will often claim they cannot tell good from evil because in the end we are all victims of our circumstances. Unbelievers make absurd claims such as that there is good in all of us, and one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, or blather on about diversity is our strength. What they mean is that cultural relativism is the only valid position for people to take, once God has been denied. But if all cultures are equal, then all lies are equal, and all actions are equal, and there is no way to distinguish one thing from another. Taken to its logical conclusion, humanity is just another animal, and our culture is nothing more than habits picked up from ancestors. If there are no right choices and nothing to divide good from evil, then we are naturally drawn to globalism. Why be divided when the divisions are meaningless? We can all live the same way, or at least not in ways that mean anything. But there are far too many good men willing to tolerate evil and too many evil men willing to be tolerated, for the issue of good and evil to be as clear as it ought to be, at least for Christians. This is why the Church of Laodicea is the prevalent model. The church is tolerant because it is liberal and a subscriber to the freeloader model of life. There's only two fundamental models we can pick from. One compromises with evil and justifies free riding, the other does not. But as mentioned above, how do we live in faith if we remain in Babylon? It is very difficult to understand what is going on unless we can understand faith. It is impossible to have faith without having something we can commit to. Liberals are one people composed of many nations, but they are all united under the one umbrella of greed. Their desire for a free ride is what unites them and drives them towards globalism. The counter to globalism is patriotism, but patriotism is less about land than about our identity. Canadian, for example, is not about being on a particular landmass as much as an identity shared by a group of persons, or patriots. Being Canadian is not about having a legal standing. Those who embrace the Canadian identity, regardless of where they are patriots. Those who reject the Canadian identity are aliens regardless of who or where they are or what the law says. The law does not define a Canadian. A Canadian is a member of a people. Canadians define what it means to be Canadian, in accordance with the Bible's description of what it means to be bound together as a church. The nation is a church and the community a local church. But how do we bind one another if there are no Canadians? What the globalists wish to destroy is patriots. A patriot supports the nation and the political jurisdiction in which he or she is located. We are a nation to the degree we are bound together, a condition referred to as living in faith. We cannot live in faith unless we as a people trust one another. It is this trust and this faith that globalists wish to eradicate. It is why they hate patriots and patriotism. The war of the gods is about the world system we are in. Legalists, whatever form they take, are globalists, and the law always serves to erode faith and trust. The law forces us to put our faith in the regulator and the law he produces. This is little more than saying the law requires we place our faith in the opinion of a man. If we are not patriots, we have nothing specific to build, and if we have nothing to build, we have no one to build it with, therefore we cannot create a true community of what is called the church. This is the war we are in, a holy war, a war between profanity and sanctity. The profane and mundane undo the holy and sanctified. The holy seeks to sanctify, whereas the profane corrupt and deconsecrate. the saints oppose the powers of corruption and desanctification that is inherent in the liberal conception of reality.